Eric Ibarra has said this about the peasant argument for the papacy.
Wait, the what?
Like the peasant argument for the papacy. So like, I'll try to explain it briefly in like 30 seconds.
Sure.
But so we've talked obviously like pretty for the average person, for like your grandma or like your peasant in the medieval ages, like pretty dense level theology probably on this conversation. And that not as an absolute necessity, but as like a moral necessity for like the average person, for like the grandma, for the I don't know, it's the peasant, for them to be able to like very clearly and visibly know what the true faith is. Like the Bishop of Rome, like the singular visible sign of unity, is like not an absolute necessity, but a moral necessity. And I thought it was a pretty good argument. The same way, like there was like a singular head visible sign of unity in like the Old Covenant with the high priest. I was just curious, kind of your thoughts on that. I'm not saying it's like once again, it's not a paradigm defeater because it's not an absolute necessity, but it is. The point is that it's kind of a moral necessity, so that like if instead of having like you can't, if you had to expect everyone to be able to argue like the material of theology to the point where they were able to like affirm or disagree with like high level Christology, people wouldn't really be able to come to the true faith. Like they wouldn't know when like, okay, I'm misunderstanding it. You know what I mean? Like if they're not coming to the right conclusion, like there's not a clear way of submitting to an authority if it's all about like the material of it rather than like the form being like submitting to the Bishop of Rome.
All right, so a couple things popped into my head. So let's go back to the time of Abraham. Okay. Was there a high priest at that time?
No.
Okay. Was there a
Abraham have been like a type of it or
well, Abraham ties to Melchizedek.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Would Melchizedek have been the high priest at that time?
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is, if you're going to make the analogy to you needed to have a single head, would it be Abraham or Melchizedek at that time that's the authority that unifies?
I think the critique. I get that. I think the critique of that would be that.
These are
Mosaic.
Hold on, they're more. Wait. But these are more peasanted people because this is the ancient world, so a more brutal world, less of an IQ than the Middle Ages, we'll say for the sake of argument. So if we're going to make a moral argument that God is bound to give and provide a simple way for the peasants, the plebs, to find unity and to find the true faith, who and where was that at the time of Abraham and Melchizedek?
Like, I guess it was communion with Abraham or like biological descent.
Oh, wait, so it's a communion. It's a communion like of the people?
Yeah, but with the.
How is that the same? But no, the argument is there's a single visible head, and that's the pleb way for the simpletons to see the true faith. That's the Ibarra argument. I remember this now because I remember Ibarra making this argument now.
Would it be that, you have to be a descendant, but also you have to be in communion with the patriarch, so like Abraham or Isaac?
No, you're missing the point. If the argument is God must provide a single visible head for the plebs, who is the single visible head that's the moral proof for the plebs in the days of Abraham and Melchizedek?
Why would saying Abraham? Why is that like I'm not understanding?
Well, why would it not be Melchizedek? Because Melchizedek is the high priest that Abraham submits to.
Would it be the way like the Pope submits to Christ? It's not like a divorced or either or thing. It's like a both and.
Yeah, but if you were going to point to the Mosaic time and say that the Mosaic administration had a high priest, then why would the high priest in that situation not also refer to Christ?
He does.
Okay, well then it doesn't refer to the Pope. Or who between Melchizedek and Abraham would be the Pope-like figure? Abraham is said to be father of all nations, so wouldn't it be Abraham? But Abraham's not a high priest, and if you wanted to use the Mosaic analogy, you're going to say the high priest is like the unifying single figure. So again, that's why this argument doesn't work. And I'm gonna give you another argument on top of this as to why it doesn't work, which is the Great Western Schism. So I mean, if you want to go ahead and answer from the Abraham period, feel free. Like, who's this single unifying figure
I
for the
think it would
plebs?
be. I'm sorry. What's plebs mean?
The peasants,
Pleasant. Oh, okay.
the dirt farmers.
But communion. Why is it that there's no like I guess like distinction? Like if you're in communion with Abraham, would you not be in communion by like?
No, the question was not communion. Again, the question is, who is the public single visible figure that provides the pleb the easy way to know the true faith?
I guess principally Melchizedek, and then secondarily Abraham.
Well, I thought the argument was we need one head. So now you're making the argument there's two heads of the church.
Well, I'm just thinking of it the same way, like Christ is like obviously the head of the church, but then the Pope is like we can also refer to him as like the father of all nations.
So who's Jesus here? Melchizedek is Jesus, and then Abraham is the Pope. I mean, this just gets ridiculous. Sorry, so fine, let's forget that. In the Great Western Schism, when there's three popes, what's the simple, visible, moral proof for the peasants? So this is a 40-year split.
Three anti-popes.
40-year split. We don't know who the Pope is, and an ecumenical council, by the way, is what solves this, not a Pope. So who were the plebs supposed to look to?
I do not know.
All right, so that's why I don't buy it. These are two examples as to where I think Ibarra's argument is just arbitrary. It doesn't work. Because if you're going to say that God was always morally bound to do this, which is what I thought that's what you're saying, right? Like there's sort of a moral obligation that God has to provide for the peasants, like a simple, easy, visible sign of unity in a single head, single earthly head.
I don't know if obligation is the right word. I don't think God's like obligated to do. I think moral necessity meaning like, yeah, it's honestly a good question. I might have just spoken.
Well, what moral necessity? What does that mean? Yeah. What did he mean by? What do you think he means by moral necessity in that argument?
I don't know. I thought it was just that like it's not like metaphysically or absolutely necessary, but if God desires that like the simple man can know the truth, and that obedience is like not rocket science for like the farmer, but that the farmer can have like a simple discipleship means like, oh, I want to be a disciple. I don't have to like get into deep metaphysics. I know the visible sign of who to follow.
Okay, so let's
like a very sound definition.
Well, let's transfer this because I like this experiment. Let's say for the sake of argument, we are going to go to the high priest of the Mosaic time. In Israel, Israel, by the way, is a type of obviously of the church. Why is it that I'm supposed to think that the high priest is a type of the Pope in this line of argumentation? Isn't there also a king? So Solomon, for example, he's the, Shalom. He's the king of peace. He reigns during a time of peace. He builds the temple. Why isn't Solomon a type of the Pope, or is he?
It can be both, right? Like, so we believe that there's certain types
of
Mary and
Christ?
Okay.
Well, I agree with that, but wait a minute. The argument was we need a single visible head. The Pope is like the high priest, and I'm saying Israel doesn't have a single visible head. Israel has a king and a priest, and those two spheres are distinct in Israeli history, in the history of Israel. In fact, Saul, for example, is castigated for engaging in priestly activities, right? Samuel rebukes him for trying to sacrifice at the altar when that's not what the king's supposed to do. So I'm just wondering, on this line of argumentation, well, if Israel has two heads, namely a priestly high priest head and a king as the head, why am I supposed to think that, oh, well, the papacy is obviously just proven by the high priest? And if you admit that he's not, then you're admitting, in my argument is, you're admitting that there's two heads of Israel. So I don't understand why this, in other words, this argument disproves the idea that there is a single head fulfillment that proves some sort of like, peasant sign of what the true church is.
I'm actually curious. So who do you think communion was, like, who was an Israelite bound to, in principle, to communion to first, the king or the high priest?
Well, it doesn't matter. I'm just saying, like, if Israel has two heads, one spiritual, one temporal. I mean, they're both in a sense spiritual, but one focuses on the temporal, one focuses on the spiritual. Why would I think that there's one head? Because remember, Roman Catholics argue that the church, Israel is a type of the church. Okay. So what is the king pointing to in the fulfillment? Is that also the Pope? If that's also the Pope, then you're admitting that in the Old Testament period, there's two heads of Israel. If there's two heads of Israel that God has ordained as a sign of unity, then that undercuts the argument of a single earthly visible head. That's the point. Because God basically has two heads for this whole time period of the Mosaic Law.
Okay. But who were they? I'm curious now, like, so, okay, even if I am wrong, I'm curious to, like, what you do with that same information. So who were they? Is this a good question? Like, who were they principally bound to first, the king or the high priest? Like, in your paradigm, like, does that make sense? Like, does my question make sense? Like, okay, even if I am wrong,
I just don't even think this argument necessarily works. That if you just find a single dude, that somehow, like, proves that God is, giving the plebs an easy, moral sign of what the church is. Because, for example, if this was true, then I would assume that when there's disputes in the church, in the early church, so like say the first 4 or 5 centuries of the church, like, wouldn't the same line of argumentation been used? So, for example, let's say it's the year 300, and I'm sure you would admit prior to Nicaea, right? There were disputes in the church, right?
yes, yeah.
Okay, so would all of those disputes be necessarily resolved by Rome, like churches that are thousands of miles away?
No.
Okay, so if I'm a new convert, I'm a Roman centurion, and I live in Corinth or Ephesus or something in the year 300, and I start hearing this message about Jesus. Is it necessary for me to learn about what's happening in the Roman See to know what the true church is?
No.
Okay, thank you. Then that right there is all that's needed to show that none of this other stuff is actually necessary for what Ibarra's trying to do.